Hey everyone, it's Anthony from 9 and Bravo Aviation, and today we're talking about the path from airline interview to airline pilot. For starters, I'm a CFI, MEI, and a CFII with an ATP certificate now. Recently, I work for Horizon Air flying the Embraer 175, and I'm currently 3 days away from my line check on IOE. So, I kind of thought it'd be fun to talk about the path from the interview to where I'm at now based on my own experiences at Horizon. Every airline's a little bit different, so I'm going to spare the gory details about Horizon's specific training programs because the FAA has different relationships with every airline. But to lay down the basics for this, Horizon Air uses an advanced qualification program, or AQP, to keep their pilots current and qualified to fly the E175, and that's probably similar to what you're going to go through at your airline with your flight training process as well. Every one of these AQPs is approved by the FAA, and it's similar to your normal checkride experience, but also slightly different. But we said we were going to start with the interview. So let's talk about the interview then. So, I went through Part 61 flight training, which means I am required to have 1,500 hours for my airline transport pilot certificate. So when I was a couple months prior to reaching 1,500, I applied at Horizon Air and got an interview in July of 2018. The reason why it's a good idea to apply earlier than 1,500 hours is because of the amount of time that it takes to get a class for your specific position. Flight first officer, flight attendants. The classes are usually for first officers is a few months out. So I interviewed in July and was offered a September class date, but I chose a November class date for personal reasons, which ended up getting pushed to a December class date, and it worked out really well for me that way. Anyways, the interview. What's going to happen? You are going to be doing probably a two-part interview with HR questions and a technical interview. The technical interview is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to be asked a bunch of technical questions. It's similar to an oral exam. You're going to be given a scenario probably in the Part 121 world with dispatch release, some weather, and some approaches or something. It'll be a scenario. And the examiner is going to have a question for you and expect you to answer it based on your knowledge of 121. And what they're looking to see is that you know the information. Not necessarily that you get it 100% correct, but that you are, you show good aptitude for it. Maybe they can fix the problems with what you don't know. I certainly didn't get 100% on my technical interview. I'm sure some people do, but I didn't. But that didn't stop them from hiring me. So that's how the technical interview goes. Every airline's going to have a different scenario. Different questions, but as a general guideline, know your Part 121 regulations, know instrument regulations, and know the FARs in general. For example, speed limits in Delta and Charlie airspace, holding speeds, those kind of things you'll want to know. The HR interview. The HR interview is a bunch of questions that help them figure out your character and also your experience as well. They'll ask you questions and you may not have an answer of something that you did 100% well. Maybe it's something that you learned from that helped build you as a pilot. For example, they'll probably ask about checkride failures. And it's important that you get a chance to think about these before you go into the HR interview. You need to make a list of experiences that you've had in an airplane failures that you've dealt with, customer problems, HR, PR issues. Maybe you had a discussion with a passenger that didn't go the way the passenger wanted it to, or the customer wanted it to, and how you handled that situation could make a very great story for an HR question or something like that. So be prepared to talk about your experiences and why they've helped better you as a pilot, even if it was not a good thing at the time, like why you failed your instrument check ride, something like that. Be prepared to talk about it. After that, your class is going to come up, and it's going to happen fast. Once you reach the 1,500-hour mark, you're going to want to stay in contact with the recruiters, your point of contact at the airline, and let them know when you've hit the 1,500 or if it's going to be an issue. It's likely not the end of the world if you haven't reached 1,500 by your class date, as long as you're in communication with the training people. For me, I started with Horizon in December of 2018, and the first couple days at your airline are most likely going to be an introduction to the company and what the company values are and where they're trying to take the company. You might be mixed with different employee groups. For example, we were mixed with ramp flight attendants, customer service agents, and other pilots, which makes sense because if you're trying to teach people about the company, you don't need to just have the pilots there. Everybody knowing the same thing about the company is a good thing. So after that, we got an introduction to flight ops, and then flight ops said, you're going to go to Dallas and you're going to take your CTP course. The ATP CTP course is a required course prior to taking your ATP written if you're not already an airline transport pilot when you get there. It's roughly 8 days where I went, 5 days in the classroom, 3 days in the sim, and the last day is your ATP written exam. It's great fun. It covers more Part 121 stuff like SMIGs and high altitude aerodynamics, MELs, CDLs, things that you probably have not experienced when you're flying your little Cessna around, which is a good program to bridge the gap between what you were doing and this new world that you're going to enter if you're unfamiliar. Plus, the sims are fun. It's a non-Jeopardy event. They're just trying to introduce you to some of the operations in the 121 world. So it's a great time to have fun with it and just absorb information in a non-threatening environment. So take the written, study for the written, use Shepherd Air. That's all I got to say. Just use Shepherd Air, get it done. And then after that, when you get back, you can really dig into all the material in the ground school stuff. For me, the first week was FOM, Flight Operations Manual. Every company's going to have an FOM approved by the FAA, and CRM, Threat and Error Management. You'll do some exercises. They're pretty fun. We did one with Domino's. It was fun. Not the pizza, unfortunately. That would have been pretty nice, but they did buy us pizza on the second day. After that week of ground school, after every big section, there's going to be an exam of sorts. We had one. It's a computer-based test on our flight operations manual. And then we moved on to the second week, which was all systems ground school, where you start digging into the airplane's systems. That lasted a week. At the end of that, there was an exam. Depending on your company's relationship with the FAA and their qualification program, that could be written, could be an oral exam. Usually at the continuing qualification points, 6 months after you're qualified initially, it's going to be an oral. I don't know of a situation where afterwards it's anything but an oral exam. So if you do luck out and get a written exam, it's probably just going to be that one-time gig until you upgrade. So, sorry. Anyway, systems ground school was great. They cover exactly what you need to know. The program's not laid out so that it's got a ton of gotcha questions. No one's playing Stump the Chump in this because it's on the company's dime, so there's no point in doing that. So don't expect any of that. Just learn what they tell you, and then do self-study for anything else that you want to know, or ask the maintenance people for all the fun facts if you want to. After our week of systems ground school, we jumped from there into the virtual procedures trainer, where we worked on our flows and normal procedures and emergency abnormal procedures in the airplane. If you've never seen a VPT before, it kind of looks like a spaceship, so I affectionately call it the spaceship. So it's a flat panel trainer with touch screens. A couple things are not touchscreen, like the FMS or the MCDU, and the autopilot, the flight guidance panel. Those were physical and the same as they would be in the airplane. But the throttles, the flight displays, those were all just touchscreens, which works out just fine. It does help bridge the gap between, just memorizing your flows and knowing them on paper to practicing them in the sim. It's very, very helpful. So that was a week of that. At the end, of course, there's a little test that you have to pass, and then if you're ready, they'll send you off to the simulators, which is the last step before your ATP check ride. For us, my sims were 2.5 weeks, 8 sessions. Again, no gotcha stuff. It's just, train to proficiency, and so that you can pass the check ride, because it's on the company's dime. Again, it's all approved by the FAA as well, so we are getting taught exactly what the FAA wants us to know about the operations for that specific airline. So you learn exactly what you need to know. Check ride. After you go through your sims, there's usually some upset prevention training where you learn how to recover from stalls. Just remember, get the nose down, add power. High altitude stalls, you'll get to do some of those too, which are actually quite interesting. Wake turbulence upsets and whatnot. But anyway, the check ride, which was what I was going to talk about. The check ride, for me, was divided into 2 parts. A maneuvers validation, which is similar to check rides that you're familiar with, like your instrument check ride, where you, if you're in the multi-engine, you had to do the single-engine ILS, you had to do that too, with a couple additions, actually. For the ATP check ride, you've got to do a single-engine missed approach, and a single-engine landing, and a single-engine approach in general. We also had to do a flap 0 landing in the 175 for our program. That's it. When you step back and think about it, it's fun. If you sort of been in the flight instructor seat before, understanding how all that stuff goes, it's kind of fun to get to do all those V1 cuts and single engine work. After that, we had a line-oriented exam, which was, again, to bridge the gap between the emergency procedures that you learned in the maneuvers validation lessons and the check ride there, and normal line flying. They give you a couple of normal legs you and the captain trade off after each one is over, and they give you an emergency of sorts between each one. Emergency or 2, it depends on your program there. Once you pass that is officially when you get your ATP check ride out of the way. That's your ATP certificate right there. After that, IOE, which is what I'm on right now. IOE is initial operating experience, and for us it's 50 hours for first officers. I believe it's 25 for the captains. They pair you up with a check airman, and I think it's probably not just my company, but all the check airmen here are awesome. Hopefully yours are too. I'm having a blast with this, getting to fly the airplane. It's nice to get the input from the check airman on, maybe it's your first landing in a jet. Never flown a jet, never landed a jet, never landed anything bigger than a 172 or a Seminole. So that transition is kind of interesting, especially going from Part 91, which is hop in the airplane and go, to getting dispatch release, dealing with ramp control frequencies now. So there's some nuances to 121 flying, but a lot of it is quite the same at the regional level, because you're not always going into huge airports. I'm about 3 days prior to my line check. At the end of this whole process, you have to get another sort of check ride from your check airman. Mine is going to be a leg between Oakland and Portland, and it's just a normal operation of the airplane. I'm just basically looking for you to be proficient enough to be released to the rest of the pilot population at your airline without having to have a check airman look over your shoulder the whole time. So as long as you do everything right, it doesn't mean you can't make mistakes, as long as it's managed in a crew environment without the check airman having to prod you to do things, I believe. That's what they're looking for. And that's the whole process. After that, you're released out onto the line, and every few months you have to come back and do more training to make sure you're continuously qualified per the qualification program set up by the FAA and your airline. I hope that this was relatively informational, as some of the things would be nice to know going into the whole airline flight training world. If it wasn't informational for you, I'm sorry. I hope that someone else can provide the informational knowledge that you need to satisfy your craving. Anyway, peace out.